Last winter, a chilling apocalypse. The first snow fell on a quiet November morning, blanketing the town of Black Hollow in an eerie silence. It was unusual for the snow to arrive so early, but no one thought much of it. The weather had been strange all year: unpredictable storms, unseasonable heat waves, and now this. The townsfolk shrugged it off, bundled up in their coats, and went about their days. But deep down, something felt wrong. By the time the second storm hit a week later, the unease had begun to spread. The snow didn't stop. It fell in relentless sheets, piling up faster than the plows could clear it. The wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling windows and clawing at doors. The temperature plummeted to levels no one had ever seen before. Thermometers shattered, pipes froze, cars refused to start, and then the power went out. Chapter 1. The Storm That Never Ended. Ellie Parker stood at her kitchen window, staring out at the endless white. She had lived in Black Hollow her entire life, and she had never seen anything like this. The snow was up to the windowsills now, and it showed no signs of stopping. Her breath fogged up the glass as she exhaled, her fingers trembling as they clutched a mug of lukewarm tea. "Ellie, come away from the window," her husband, Mark, called from the living room. He was huddled by the fireplace, trying to coax a few more minutes of warmth from the dwindling flames. "You're letting the cold in." Ellie didn't move. She couldn't. Something about the storm felt alive. The way the wind screamed, the way the snow seemed to shift and swirl as if it had a mind of its own. It was watching her. She could feel it. "Ellie," Mark said again, his voice sharper this time. She finally turned away, her heart pounding in her chest. "Something's not right," she whispered. Mark sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "It's just a storm, Ellie. It'll pass." But it didn't pass. Chapter 2. The First Disappearance. The next morning, Ellie woke to the sound of shouting. She threw on her coat and boots and rushed outside, where a small crowd had gathered in the street. The snow had stopped for the moment, but the air was so cold it burned her lungs. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the winds. "It's Tommy," one of the neighbors said, his face pale. "He's gone." Tommy was a 6-year-old boy who lived down the street. His mother, Mrs. Hargrove, was sobbing uncontrollably, clutching his favorite stuffed animal to her chest. "He was just playing in the yard," she wailed. "I turned my back for 1 second, and he was gone." Ellie's stomach churned. She scanned the street, her eyes landing on a set of small footprints leading away from the Hargroves' house. The prints disappeared into the snowbank at the edge of the yard, as if Tommy had simply vanished. Chapter 3. The Frostbitten Master. That night, the temperature dropped even further. Ellie and Mark sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets, listening to the wind howl outside. The house creaked and groaned under the weight of the snow, and Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her eyes darting to the window. Mark frowned. "Hear what?" "That scratching sound." They both fell silent, listening. At first, there was nothing but the wind. And then, faintly, they heard it. A slow, deliberate scratching at the front door. Mark grabbed the poker from the fireplace and crept toward the door, his breath visible in the freezing air. Ellie followed close behind, her heart pounding in her ears. "Who's there?" Mark called, his voice steady but laced with fear. There was no answer, just more scratching. Mark unlocked the door and pulled it open, revealing a figure standing on the porch. It was a man, barely. His skin was pale and cracked, his eyes hollow and lifeless. Frost clung to his hair and eyelashes, and his clothes were stiff with ice. "Help me," he rasped, his voice barely audible. Mark stepped back, his grip tightening on the poker. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man didn't answer. He just stood there, swaying slightly, his breath coming in shallow gasps. And then, without warning, he collapsed into the snow. Chapter 4. The Truth Beneath the Ice. They brought the man inside, laying him by the fire and wrapping him in blankets. His skin was like ice to the touch, and his lips were blue. "What's wrong with him?" Ellie whispered, her hands trembling as she tried to warm him. Mark shook his head. "I don't know, but he's not the only one." Over the next few days, more people began to disappear. Some were found later, frozen solid, their faces twisted in terror. Others were never seen again. The town was in a panic, but there was nowhere to go. The roads were impassable, the phones were dead, and the snow kept falling. And then there were the whispers. At first, Ellie thought it was just the wind. But as the days turned into weeks, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They spoke of a presence in the storm, something ancient and hungry, something that had been waiting, biding its time, until the world was cold enough for it to awaken. At Chapter 5, The Last Stand. By the time the truth became clear, it was too late. The storm wasn't just a storm, it was a harbinger. The thing in the snow had come to claim the town, and there was no escape. Ellie and Mark barricaded themselves in their home, but they knew it wouldn't be enough. The scratching at the door grew louder, more insistent, until the wood began to splinter. "Ellie," Mark said, his voice trembling. "I love you." She nodded, tears freezing on her cheeks. "I love you too." And then the door burst open, and the cold rushed in. Prologue. The last winter, when the snow finally stopped, there was nothing left of Black Hollow but a frozen wasteland. The houses were buried, the streets were silent, and the people were gone. But if you listen closely on the coldest nights, you can still hear the whispers. They say the thing in the snow is still out there, waiting for the next winter. And when it comes, no one will survive.